All right, and this is the Consume podcast. Thank you for joining us. I am Lance Ranker, and I am joined by Rick Ranker, otherwise known as the Double R. Actually, I don't know if you're actually known that way, but you know,
I'm known as a lot of things.
the Double R being some of the most polite of them.
Yeah, a little bit.
This is the Consume podcast. Like I said, you can check us out on consume.com. That's consume with a K. And you could also hit me up on Twitter at Lance M. Ranker. What about your Twitter handle?
I am at Rick Rinker.
See, you didn't include the M there. Ugh, it's horrible.
No, not going to happen.
So I got a lot to get to. A lot going on as far as international news is concerned. Obviously, the Ukrainian crisis is the big thing. And let me just kick things off by asking you this question. Is the Ukraine crisis now a global issue?
I don't know about global, but I would say that it's certainly, I would liken it to a patch of land in the jaws between two superpowers. I don't know how much the rest of the world really cares. I think that if you live in Europe, or if you live in Russia, you care, and if you live in the Ukraine, this is, sort of your life hanging in the balance.
Well, and the reason why I pose that question is because look at it like this. Russian President Vladimir Putin clearly is going for the whole imperial, he has these imperial ambitions, essentially. He took over Crimea, and he wants to essentially cause so much disruption within Ukraine as he has done by arming the pro-Russian rebel forces there, that the end goal, obviously, is to essentially take over the entire country once they've essentially been whittled down, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
So
There's no question about that.
So then what's going
really
on? As well as the fact that you apparently can't fly a commercial jet over those borders there any longer without fear of being shot down by weapons provided by Russia to the pro-Russian rebels. Should this not take sort of precedence globally as far as other world governments saying, you know what, we should probably do something about this?
Well, yeah, but the question is who? I mean, the U.S., we have been, as a nation, trying to push that angle and pushing sanctions, which we did, actually, ironically, the day before the Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 went down.
Correct.
But there's very little political will within Europe to do much about it because they rely on Russian oil for their energy. And the rest of the world, it's really not their fight. China has a sort of hands-off approach to everything, and they're on the UN Security Council.
Right.
And all the other members on the Security Council are European. So I don't really see where the will would come into play to really try to force a vindictive and powerful guy like Putin to try to in any way obstruct what he's trying to do.
Well, here's where I believe that maybe some headway can be made, and that rests with Germany, because while they also rely on a fair amount of trade with Russia, but that's also disrupting their backyard. And so what happens if Russia does take over essentially Ukraine and a land grab, much like Israel wants to destroy Hamas and the Palestinian people and take over all that land, which they've been doing anyway? So what's to stop Putin from saying, I did this, maybe I can do a little bit more, and just kind of furthering along his agenda there? I mean, really, we don't really know what the true end game for Putin and Russia is. But even the Russian people are somewhat sympathetic in the recent chain of events with Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 in the eastern Ukraine being shot down with 80 children on board. The pro-Russian rebels said, nope, wasn't us, we don't know what you're talking about. Then just a few days later, 2 Ukrainian fighter jets are shot down, which they claim responsibility for. So either they have the capability or they don't, right?
No, certainly they have the capability. There were journalists in the field who were with them when they were showing off the SA-11 missile system, literally 24 hours before the Malaysian flight was shot down. We have, relatively firm American intelligence that shows the flash signature and the plane explosion on satellite. We know it came from pro-Russian separatist-controlled areas of eastern Ukraine. I don't really think that there's any evidence whatsoever that it was not Russian-provided SA-11 missile system fired by in fact a Russian officer who is now fighting as a quote-unquote pro-Russian separatist.
Right.
So the Putin fingerprints are all over it, and look, Putin's the same guy who said, oh, it's not us who's going in to take over Crimea. And then a few weeks later, it's like, okay, yeah, you got me. It was us who came in to take over Crimea.
Yeah, exactly. And he goes there, the big old parade, like, hey, look at us, yeah, we won, and all of a sudden further emboldening the rebels. And then they just continue on marching along, trying to take over the rest of Ukraine. Ultimately, I don't believe they will succeed, unless, of course, Russia goes in more directly. But if that were to happen, that's really going to trigger some more global attention, would it not?
No, I think what they very well may do is there's a river that runs through the east and the south of the Ukraine, all the way in the south down to like Odessa in the east, obviously where a lot of the more rural, what I would call the equivalent of Ukrainian rednecks, like the people that, and I don't mean that as pejorative necessarily, but I say that to sort of provide context for the region, and it's a lot of people who tend to be more guns, God, and government, only in this case, maybe not so much God as it is Russian nationalism.
Right. Well, and that's the other issue, though, is, okay, well, fine. Let's say that the pro-Russian rebels, they get their little slice of heaven there, and they're be considered either a part of Russia or some little tiny country very, very similar in shape and form to Russia in the way that the Russian government operates. I would imagine that they would probably want Russia to simply absorb and be a part of Russia. Well, let's say that happens. What next? I mean, then all of a sudden you have a very unstable Ukrainian government, as well as the people there that are suffering. Do we just ignore that when it was something that was actually instigated by Vladimir Putin?
Well, I don't know what authority we as the United States has to really to come in and get in between the Russian president and a former Russian state. And it's disconcerting to the global population. It's disconcerting to Europe for sure. It's disconcerting to the U.S. because there's sort of this underlying game that we're playing, and the underlying game is Russia wants to reemerge as a world superpower, and we really don't want them to. And so there's this sort of proxy war, if you will, where we're sort of funding the Ukraine, and we wanted to try to get them a missile system. So they can protect themselves, and we want to democratize them as much as possible. And they're kind of on board, but it's almost like a red state, blue state thing. They're kind of 50-50 about that. And then Putin is, you got to keep in mind too, a lot of the television that's going on in the Ukraine was Russian language television for years and years and years. And it wasn't until somewhat recently that they have other forms of media that are not state-sanctioned propaganda. So, there's a bit of a divide within the Ukrainian population, particularly between those in the northwest and those in the east and to the south. And it's very, again, to use the analogy, very red state, sort of blue state divide. Right,
makes sense. But here's the other issue, because Putin and just the Russian government has continuously denied that they have actually fired any artillery or rockets themselves. They said they're not doing anything from their own border. But the United States believes Russia is actually firing artillery across their border at Ukrainian military positions. The State Department actually said this about a half an hour ago in a report that they released in a statement that they made. And the White House and the administration believes that Moscow is actually playing a far more direct role in the Ukrainian conflict than what they're acknowledging.
Well, I think we saw that
nudge.
In Crimea. I think that became very evident. Vice was sort of one of the first guys on the ground who weren't just having a local fixer get stock footage and then a talking head reporting from the safety of a 4-star hotel. They were actually on the ground, and you could see that it was Russian equipment, Russian soldiers with Russian uniforms, simply with the flag removed from the uniform, and they were just calling them like local rebels, and it's kind of a joke. And so there's no question that Vladimir Putin is putting as many putting a lot of boots on the ground, a lot of equipment in the field, putting a lot of propaganda over the air, and doing everything he can to at least have it pass the sniff test that the people of Ukraine, or at least of the region, want to join Russia. I think there's a lot of people who are terrified there. I know that there was a guy from the Ukraine who did an AMA on Reddit earlier in the week, and the picture he paints is one of kind of fear, where everybody sort of is afraid to speak up because there are people with assault rifles in the streets, and if you make too much noise, you just kind of disappear, or you get locked up.
Right. Well, and then that doesn't say anything about the upwards of almost 20,000 troops that Russia actually has still on the Ukrainian border. Each of them obviously equipped with heavy artillery and rocket launchers. And so it seems Putin might actually be worried that perhaps the Ukrainian counteroffensive, once it happens or once they really ramp it up here soon, may actually be enough to push back this rebel force. And maybe he's kind of waiting to see if that happens before really invading officially.
Well, I think he kind of stepped in it this week, though. The shooting down a passenger jet is not, that's not just a whoops, no big deal kind of situation. That is a global outrage, and now, I think he has unwittingly brought much more attention to this globally than he would have anticipated. I know that Italy and France and the back channel diplomacy have now expressed a little, at least less reluctance to move forward with sanctions against Russia, which is really going to hurt them where it hurts the most. But at the same time, they can only sanction so much because they require this Russian oil, whose pipeline goes through the Ukraine, in order to keep their homes during the winter and things like that. So Europe is just not in a position to do much about it except really just hope that other levers can be applied, either diplomatically or through force, to stave this off.
Right, exactly. But the one other thing I want to touch on here before we maybe shift to immigration, because I know that's kind of a big topic, and there's actually a few other things going on as well. There was the man in Arizona that it took 2 hours to actually execute him after they applied some experimental cocktail, thinking, this will work perfectly, and he basically gasped for air for about an hour and a half before he finally died. And then, of course, this actually was just reported, found it on Twitter, but Southwest Airlines kicked a family off a flight because a man ranted on Twitter about the horrible rude service they received at the front gate or something. So maybe touch on that here in a few minutes as well. But immigration, we'll get to immigration next. But I do want to point out, the sanctions that have been taking place, and especially recently. Basically, the biggest one, at least in my opinion, is the one for Rosneft. They're a major energy company that have very close ties to Chevron and ExxonMobil. And they also currently have a $900 billion oil drilling deal in the Arctic with Exxon, which is currently underway. But these newest sanctions actually forbid U.S.-based companies from issuing new long-term financing agreements. So we're just waiting to see if those assets that are tied up in that deal become completely frozen around.
Well, yeah, and I know that there's also a UN investigation or resolution that I saw happen the day before yesterday, I think, and who knows where that's going to go. But I do know that the Russian billionaires are very concerned about the prospect of them not having access to, frankly, some of the the U.S., which is the world's largest consumer economy, and not having access to that would be disastrous for them. So they're starting to, at least internally as well, have a little bit of pressure. I mean, as much pressure as you can apply to to a guy like Vladimir Putin within Russia.
Yeah, exactly. All of a sudden his billionaire buddies are like, hey, maybe we should back off these guys, and we'll see.
Well, I don't know how much of buddies they are, because wasn't there a billionaire that spoke out against Putin about 9 years ago, and he ended up spending about a decade in a prison and having all of his assets seized?
Oh yeah, but no, it's cool, man. They were pen pals, so it's all good. So immigration, that kind of came to a head. President Barack Obama actually visited, Governor Rick Perry here in Texas, at least where I'm at here, and really no firm solution on the border crisis. I mean, this has been building up for decades now, anyway. But I've got to give Governor Perry his due, because a couple of years ago, during his failed presidential bid and whatnot, when he really stepped in it because he couldn't think of the third branch of the government, but he basically said,
which federal agencies would he eliminate? His entire campaign platform.
Right. Well, there was also another instance where he could not think of the third branch of government. So, both of those, but yeah, still comical. But he did get it right when he said a couple of years ago that there's a major issue brewing on the border, and that the White House needed to do something about it. Okay, just to kind of give you an idea here, Texas's border with Mexico is 1,200 miles long, and so while 1,000 National Guardsmen have recently been essentially ordered and going to be deployed here to help the U.S. Border Patrol, it's not really going to do a whole lot for that stretch of land. It might make it actually less feasible for some of these immigrants to actually come into the country successfully, but it's not. It's only really going to slow the tide there. It's not going to do a whole lot else. So of course, there's also the border with California and Arizona, and New Mexico. It's also at issue here. But my question is, what all can really be done about the border other than completely shutting it down? Because the other thing I want to point out is that when Perry sent a letter to the president, which was ignored, I will say that, that basically there was just 5,200 unaccompanied children in 2012, and this was according to a report in the Washington Post. But we've got more than 52,000 this year, basically built up.
Yeah, I mean, other than shutting down the border, there's not a whole lot that can be done because we've sort of created an economic nightmare or perfect storm, if you will, in Mexico, where that's where we've always looked to for cheap labor. Never really partnered with Mexico the same way that we have with the European Union or Canada or Japan or a lot of the other places where perhaps it's more economically lucrative. And so as a result, there aren't a whole lot of natural resources, and we've right next door to Mexico is the U.S., the largest consumer of cocaine and marijuana on the planet. So it almost seems inevitable that you were going to create a sort of I don't want to say rogue state, but a place where it's more prosperous to traffic in the illicit than it is to earn an above board living. And so people are fleeing as a result of power struggles and look, man, I mean, your corporations down there are largely drug dealers. So
right. Well, and
if that's your environment, I'm going to send my kid with a note headed up to the border too.
See, and that's the other issue here is the cartels there. They basically run everything, and when parents are so desperate that they feel that their child would have a better shot at surviving by sending them to trek across the border in the United States alone or with coyotes, as opposed to staying there with them, that should really tell you something. So why not just go in there and kick some ass with Mexican military or police force or whatnot, and try to really shore some things up as far as the cartels are concerned?
Well, I think that that ship may have sailed. I think that may be trying to maybe much akin to putting the toothpaste back in the tube. It's like trying to get guns out of the U.S. How do you do that? Well, look, we've been dealing them pretty freely for a couple of hundred years. You're not gonna make that problem go away anymore. The only thing you can do is introduce real economic trade in a way that allows people within Mexico to operate, but it's still going to ultimately end up being controlled by the cartel.
Well, and that's the other thing. It kind of takes me back to the days of prohibition here in the United States. All of a sudden, it's what was going on. You didn't really realize you could do a whole lot about it at the time, so you just tried to work with them the best you could without getting your face shot off. But with their cartels, they're far more vicious than that. They don't have this unwritten rule where they're not going to go after your wife and kids. They freely and gladly go after your wife and children first and foremost, to basically force you into working for them.
Sure, and also as a shining beacon to anybody else that may think about opposing them or not going along with the program. So, I mean, it's very effective, but from a PR standpoint, it's not doesn't really seem like the ideal way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And so, I don't know. I mean, is the solution maybe to go in there and just sort of carpet bomb the area and help, quote unquote, help Mexico that way?
No, because what you would see is, I mean, you'd be fighting a guerrilla war within the U.S. I mean, a couple of reasons. Number one, you're going to find that if people feel that their country is being carpet bombed, they're going to flee the area. A lot of them are going to flee to the north. A lot of people who already live here are going to be rioting in the streets. I mean, you're talking about dropping bombs and not guaranteeing that there won't be, a lot of innocent people's lives, homes, livelihoods just completely obliterated. And for what? I mean, the guys who are running things are still, even if you kill, I don't know, 30% of people who run, in organized crime, it just creates a power vacuum, and then you have a lot of up-and-comers who are looking to fill those ranks. Like, look at our mafia back that we had in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. You couldn't just take out a handful of guys because there's 20 other guys lined up waiting to fill in. I think it honestly, it's going to have to be economically. I think that until you can match what the country is bringing in the black market through trade, through above board commerce or labor or professional services or resources or whatever it is, I don't see the problem going away.
Well, let me pose this question then, because a lot of the money that the cartels make are off of drugs and guns. Two of the biggest things that we love here in America, apparently. What about at least, say, legalizing marijuana and maybe trying to drum up something to the effect of limiting what the cartels can make off of other substances such as cocaine or whatever else?
I mean, marijuana could certainly, and already has started to put a dent in their bottom line. But I don't think that, I don't know, I don't see us getting to the point where the U.S. is in any way equipped to begin manufacturing cocaine. That all comes from Central America, who then gets processed and then packaged and then shipped through Mexico. So I mean, that demand is never going to go away. The war on drugs has been a miserable failure.
And has cost billions upon billions of dollars and countless number of innocent lives. I mean, the vast majority of people in prison right now are there due to non-violent offenses, specifically minor drug offenses, and the large majority of them are of color.
Yeah, I mean,
whether it's blacks, Hispanics, or whatever, the law basically unfairly targets minorities because of sort of different class status and social economic situations.
Yeah, you get caught with a gram of coke, you're going to go to rehab and maybe get a slap on the wrist. You get caught with a gram of crack rock, and you're going to do some minimum mandatory prison time.
Yeah, but you can't make the one without the other. I mean, it's so weird. And then of course, marijuana is treated almost as badly as heroin sometimes.
Yeah, it depends on what state you're in. Like if you're in a place like Texas and you got a couple of ounces on you, you could be in some trouble.
Right.
like jail time. But I feel like we're sort of turning the corner on marijuana. There really has been I think the revolution that a lot of the hippies thought they were going to get in the '60s has finally come to fruition now that they're, now that they're entering their golden years.
Yeah, finally, like after they've already kind of done all that grand experiment, and we're like, we're over that. So it's kind of interesting the way that sort of happened here. So outside of either just going in and taking Mexico over the way we could have back during the Mexican-American War, and instead we only took Texas and basically California and westward because we were being polite apparently. Really, the only other option that seems somewhat reasonable is just essentially completely militarizing the border.
Yeah, and I really don't see a way around that. I don't see how we can not militarize the border. It's gotten to a critical mass, but the thing that's going to have to accompany that is, we're going to have to buck up and really accept that there is a humanitarian crisis there. We are the neighbors to the north, and that would be like something tragic happening here in the States where we hit a rapid decline, and Canada, lining up with Mounties saying, we don't care. We don't care that your children are in fear for their life. We don't care that you can't feed yourself. We don't care that there are armed thugs raping and pillaging. That just sucks for you. That's not. I don't see how a human being, regardless of the position of power they are in, could possibly take that approach. So yes.
See, and even Governor Perry of Texas, he's quite conservative, mind you, feels that it is a humanitarian crisis, and even he has said that the children that are here, how can you not show compassion for them? I mean, he has even said that.
I mean, one of the options, I mean, and we're talking hypothetically, is okay, maybe we militarize the border, but we let a lot of refugees into secured refugee camps, and then we work with our partners around the globe, whether it be in South America, not so much Africa, but maybe Europe, maybe Canada, maybe even Southeast Asia, and we work to relocate families to a place where perhaps they have an opportunity, if not in prosperity, then at the very least a better lifestyle that does provide some opportunities for them around the world, so that it's not just one small region taking the brunt of the overflow.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of get into the issues of the bungled Arizona execution. So, convicted double murderer Joseph Wood, he was convicted of this double murder in 1989. And 55 years old, well, yesterday, it took 2 hours for him to finally die after the Arizona execution folks, those kind of people there, actually administered this experimental drug cocktail that they said would work just fine. Didn't work just fine. Basically, he gasped for air and snorted for 90 minutes, just about, if not a little bit more. Okay, so basically 1 hour and 57 minutes after the so-called lethal injection drugs were administered, he was finally pronounced dead at 3:49 p.m. Central Time, or local time there. So basically, this is the third prolonged execution in the U.S. this year. In January, it was Ohio, an inmate gasped in similar fashion for nearly half an hour. Oklahoma, an inmate died of a heart attack in April, minutes after prison officials halted his execution because the drugs weren't being properly administered. But if you've already tried basically administering poison to somebody, how do you stop administering it? I mean, you've already killed them anyway, just in a less humane manner. So I want your thoughts here because, before we kind of went on the air, you actually had a pretty interesting take on this, kind of detailing back to the European drug companies who have stopped supplying these drug cocktails that were working, that the United States is now running out of.
Yeah, and so, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 years ago, Europe or the companies within Europe that manufacture the drugs meant for lethal injection decided that that execution is simply inhumane and they were no longer going to sell us these drugs. And so there was sort of a scramble where, as they started running out of these drug cocktails, they began consulting with a handful of their own physicians and chemists, and they got it in their head that, okay, well, we'll just do this and it'll be okay, no problem. And so as these inmates were coming up and understanding that, okay, there's been a shift in the drug cocktail, they actually began suing and filing lawsuits to get a stay of execution for their execution because they said, hang on, this is untested, this may not work, it has the potential to really just be a horrifying way to go. And they fought tooth and nail and said, nope, there's no evidence whatsoever that would suggest that this is in any way going to be a problem. The judge agreed with them, off goes the execution, and guess what? There's a problem.
Mm-hmm. And here's the thing, since the Supreme Court cleared the way to reinstate the death penalty in 1977, each and every state, they've moved away from hanging, gas chambers, the electric chair, and firing squads, all of which seem so much more, humane than what's going on right now. More specifically, firing squads. I mean, if you want to kill somebody, why not do it instantly? Why have it take up to 10 minutes on a good day, so-called, or up to several hours on a bad one? I mean, wouldn't a firing squad be far more effective? And the way they did basically, kind of a blind setup way to where those officers or those members of the institution of the prison there nobody knew who actually had the live bullet. They'd have like a panel of 7 to 9 guys fire, and all but one had a blank, but nobody knew who had it, or nobody knew who had the real bullet. Why not do that? It's more humane. It's pretty much instant, and furthermore, it would save hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
Yeah, but then we couldn't feel good about ourselves in the manner with which we murder a person.
Murder is murder, no matter how you do it.
Well, but not in the eyes of a lot of people who are very pro-state, anti-crime. In their mind, it's, oh, you just give them an injection and they go to sleep peacefully and into the night. Whereas if they actually have to see the horrors of what it looks like to kill a person, frankly, I don't think that many people are as comfortable with that. So they'd rather stick with this injection idea because it's cleaner, it's not as messy. The public can kind of swallow that pill a little easier, and they don't have to face the realities of what it is to kill a man.
Well, let me just wrap up by saying this. On average, it takes upwards of anywhere from 18 to 24 months to actually wrap up a trial when you're actually going for the death penalty or life without parole conviction of somebody. Furthermore, in some states, it costs upwards of $3 million to try that case, and that's even if you don't get it. And then it can cost upwards of $90,000 a month on the cheap end to actually house these, basically these death row inmates. I mean, it does not make a whole lot of sense to do it this way.
Well, nothing about the prison industrial complex makes a whole bunch of sense, but that would take up an entire podcast just to talk about that alone.
Well, we can definitely get into that maybe on the next one next week or something. But I'm going to just close with saying about this because I want to present basically today's worst. As far as just a company that kind of did a super shitty thing. But I will say this: the death penalty has become inhumane. Bring back something simple like a firing squad or whatnot. Then all right, fine, because yeah, some people just deserve it, I guess. But otherwise, the way trying to basically waffle between, oh well, we want to murder your ass, but we want to do it in a way that we can feel good about it. Really? Yeah, I don't know. I call bullshit.
Yeah, I'm with you. I call bullshit too.
Yeah, so that's just me, but maybe we can get to this prison industrial complex here in a later podcast. But before we wrap this up, basically today's worst for me is Southwest Airlines. Basically, a man and his family, all right, and he had two daughters with him, 6 and 9 years old. They were removed from a Southwest flight because the man tweeted about a rude gate agent. So this happened in Minnesota. The man says he was removed from Southwest Airlines flight and forced to delete a critical tweet he'd made about a rude gate agent before being allowed to fly home. Basically, they held his family hostage because they didn't like that he tweeted something to the lines of, wow, rudest agent in Denver, gave her name Kimberly, last initial S, gate C39, not happy, and he tweeted it to Southwest Airlines Twitter handle. So basically, this gate agent said that, oh, I felt threatened, I felt my life was in danger. So he deleted the tweet, and then that's when basically they were removed from the flight after they were already boarded and prevented all the other passengers from taking off, and then basically told them, you delete the tweet or we will not let you fly home, or basically leave the airport. I mean, that's kind of cruddy. But hey, never fear, Southwest has basically made this right, and they've reached out to Watson and his family and offered him a $50 voucher for future flights. Now, the guy says that he plans to donate to charity because he's never going to fly Southwest again.
Yeah, and to me, I look at this is a situation of two different parties behaving badly. First of all, this guy, if you know anything about the way Southwest boards, he is in the, what's their version of the elite, the A-list or whatever?
Yeah, he was an A-lister.
Okay, so he's not, so he is an A-lister, and only he is an A-lister. He had two kids. Now, if you're boarding with a party like 2 years of age and younger, they can board in your group if you're A-list. Anyway, so this guy, he's an A-lister, so what that means is you can cut at the front of the line and go in, but just you. Well, he was trying to get his two kids to be able to board A-list with him, and they're like, no, that's not the way this works. And he got very huffy and insistent and whatever, so he took to Twitter and tried to call this person out by name. I mean, basically just being an entitled douchebag.
Right.
But where it goes beyond the pale is when this flight attendant sees the tweet that was made and called her out by name. Well, first of all, an airport is one of the most secure places you can possibly be in the States. So the idea that she felt for her unsafe or felt her safety was in jeopardy is absolute bullshit.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And then saying that, unless he deleted the tweet, not only could he not board the plane or, they took him off, they also threatened to call the police until he deleted the tweet. And so now the guy's got, his couple of kids with him. He's got to make the flight, and he's thinking, okay, not only am I not going to go to where I'm going, instead I'm going to spend the night in jail. What's going to happen to my kids? I don't know. So it was a bullshit play on both of them. One person decided to act like a douchebag, and then the Southwest flight attendant decided to be an even bigger douchebag.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's just that to me though. When corporations behaving badly, and then they think they can get away with it, so they're my today's worst. And so we'll just kind of leave it at that. But next week, we're going to definitely have more of this for you guys. Appreciate you listening. So I'm Lance. That's Rick. Be sure to check us out on Twitter at LanceMRanker, at RickRanker. And be sure to hit us up at Konsume.com. That's Konsume with a K. Got any final thoughts?
Nope. Until next week.
All right. Adios.